The aftermath of the battle left Zorath in a strange silence. The enemy fleet had been defeated, but the cost of victory was heavy. Zorath's fleet had taken damage, and many brave warriors had fallen in the fight. The air was thick with the scent of burning metal and the hum of damaged ships being repaired. The people of Zorath had survived, but the war had only just begun. Lyra stood at the balcony of the royal palace, looking out at the sky. The stars seemed to sparkle as if nothing had changed, but she knew better. Everything had changed. Behind her, Kyle approached, his footsteps quiet. He had been by her side through the battle, offering guidance and strength. She could feel his presence even before he spoke. "You did it, Lyra." Kale's voice was calm, but there was a note of respect. "In it now. Zorath is safe for now." Lyra didn't turn to face him. She stared at the horizon, her mind still racing. "It doesn't feel like a victory," she said softly. "We've won the battle. But what about the next one? What about the future?" Kyle moved to stand beside her, his eyes following hers as they scanned the skies. "There will always be another battle, Lyra. But the real question is, what kind of leader do you want to be? One who leads from fear or one who leads from strength?" Lyra's gaze lingered on the stars for a moment longer before she finally spoke, her voice steady but uncertain. "I don't know if I'm strong enough for this. I've never had to make these kinds of decisions before. I've never been in this kind of fight." Kale's expression softened, a hint of understanding in his eyes. "You are stronger than you think. You've already shown it. You've led your people through the darkest hours, and you didn't do it alone. You had help." Lyra turned to face him, her eyes searching his. "You've helped me, Kyle. You've shown me what it means to fight for something. But I can't rely on you forever. I have to be the one to lead Zorath." Kyle nodded, his gaze steady. "You already are. You've learned to trust your instincts, to make tough choices. That's what it means to lead. And when you're ready, you'll know what comes next." Lyra stood in silence, the weight of his words sinking in. She had spent so much time feeling afraid of what she didn't understand, afraid of the power that came with being a leader. But now, after the battle, she knew she couldn't keep running from it. She had to embrace it. She had to embrace her role as the ruler of Zorath. "The war isn't over," Lyra said finally, her voice filled with resolve. "There will be more threats, more battles, and more choices to make. But I'll face them. I won't run anymore." Kyle gave her a small, approving nod. "That's the leader I knew was inside you." The tension that had once been between them, the fear Lyra had felt when she first saw Kale, had all but disappeared. There was no more fear of him. In fact, Kale had become a symbol of everything she needed to embrace: strength, courage, and the ability to fight for what was right. He had shown her that even in the darkest times, there was always a way forward. As the days passed, Lyra's leadership continued to grow. She worked alongside her father, Kale, and the council, making decisions that would shape Zorath's future. She coordinated with the Zorathian warriors and diplomats, planning for the coming challenges. But no matter how busy she became, she always made time to check in with Kale. His presence had become a steadying force for her, someone she could rely on when the weight of leadership felt too much to bear. One evening, as they sat together in the palace's quiet courtyard, Lyra turned to Kyle, her eyes thoughtful. "What happens now? You've helped us win, but what about your own people? What about your home?" Kyle looked at her, his expression thoughtful. "I'll always fight for those who need help, but my war is far from over. I've fought for survival before, and I'll fight for it again. My mission is to find a way back to Earth, to help my people. But Zorath will always have a place in my heart." Lyra nodded, understanding the weight of his words. She had known that Kale's time here was limited, that one day he would leave to return to his own world. But for now, they were allies, and that was enough. "I'll never forget what you've done for us, Kyle," Lyra said softly. "You've shown me what it means to be a true leader. And for that, I'll always be grateful." Kale smiled, a rare, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "You don't need to thank me, Lyra. You've already shown you're ready to lead. The only thing left is to keep moving forward." Lyra stood, feeling a sense of peace that had eluded her for so long. She had come to understand that leadership wasn't about having all the answers. It was about making decisions in the face of uncertainty and trusting in her ability to grow and learn from each experience. As the night sky stretched out before her, Lyra felt ready for whatever came next. She wasn't the princess who had once been scared of the unknown. She was the leader of Zorath, and she would fight for her people until the very end. And with Kyle's strength and guidance behind her, she knew they had a chance to survive whatever challenges the future held. The battle had begun. The warships from the neighboring planet were now within striking distance of Zorath's borders. The peaceful world that had once been untouched by war was now facing its greatest threat. Lyra stood at the command center, watching the flickering lights on the map that displayed the enemy's movements. The tension in the room was thick, and the silence was deafening. All eyes were on her. They were waiting for her to make the next move. Kale stood beside her, his presence a calm reassurance in the midst of the chaos. His eyes never left the screen, his face hard with focus. He had been right about the calm before the storm, and now the storm was here. The Zorathian fleet, although technologically advanced, was outnumbered. They were fighting not just for their planet, but for their very survival. "We need to act quickly," Lyra said, her voice steady but filled with urgency. "We cannot afford to wait for them to strike first. We must take the initiative." Kyle nodded, his gaze flicking over the map. "Your people are skilled, Lyra, but this battle is going to come down to more than just strength. You need to think like a human. You need to be unpredictable." Lyra turned to him, a frown forming on her face. "Unpredictable? What do you mean?" Kale's eyes met hers, the intensity in them not lost on her. "In war, the enemy expects you to act in a certain way. They think they know what you'll do. But if you break their expectations, if you make them second-guess everything, you'll have the advantage." Lyra took in his words. She had never thought of it that way before. The Zorathians were always so methodical, so precise. Their strategy was based on years of knowledge and advanced technology. But Kale's words made her realize that sometimes unpredictability could be more powerful than strategy. "We'll use their own tactics against them," Lyra said, her voice gaining strength. "We'll make them think we're weak, that we're retreating. Then we'll strike when they least expect it." Kale smiled slightly, impressed. "Exactly. You've got it." The plan was set. Zorath's fleet would appear to fall back, retreating toward the planet's atmosphere, as if giving up. The enemy, thinking they had the upper hand, would follow. But that was when the Zorathians would turn the tide, ambushing them with all their strength. It was risky, but it was their only chance. As the fleet prepared for battle, Lyra found herself at the heart of the action. She wasn't just giving orders from a distance anymore, she was in the thick of it, her hands on the controls, her mind racing with every decision. She could feel the weight of her responsibility bearing down on her, but there was no time to hesitate. Her people were depending on her. Kyle remained by her side, offering advice and guidance where needed. Despite her growing confidence, Lyra knew she wasn't in this alone. Kyle's experience and strength were invaluable, and she was starting to see him not just as an outsider, but as an ally, someone she could rely on. The battle was chaotic. Zorath's ships moved in and out of formation, the hum of engines and the crackle of weapons filling the air. Lyra's heart pounded in her chest as she watched the enemy fleet approach. The plan was working so far, but they still had a long way to go. One wrong move and everything could fall apart. Now, Lyra muttered to herself, her eyes locked on the screen. She gave the order to fire, and the Zorathian fleet turned sharply, launching their full force at the enemy. The enemy ships were caught off guard just as they had expected. Zorath's ambush was a success. The sound of explosions filled the air as enemy ships were torn apart. The Zorathians were relentless, their firepower overwhelming. But there were too many enemy ships, and soon Zorath's fleet began to take hits. Lyra's heart raced as she saw the damage reports come in, the status of each ship flashing across the screen. "Maintain course!" Lyra shouted, her voice fierce. "Keep pushing forward! We cannot let them regroup!" Kyle was at her side, his eyes scanning the chaos. "You've got this, Lyra. Don't lose your focus." For a moment, everything seemed to slow down. Lyra could feel the weight of every decision she made, every command she gave. She wasn't just a princess anymore. She was the leader of her people. She had to be strong for them, for Zorath. Then, a new wave of enemy ships appeared on the screen. More of them moving fast toward their position. They had underestimated the enemy's numbers. Lyra's heart sank, but she refused to let it show. "We need reinforcements. We can't hold them off for much longer." Kale moved closer, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You don't need reinforcements, Lyra. You need to think. There's always a way out of this." She looked at him, her eyes filled with determination. "We can't afford to lose. Zorath can't survive another war." Kale's gaze softened. "Then we won't lose. Not today." With a deep breath, Lyra turned back to the controls. The enemy fleet was closing in fast. There was no more time for hesitation. She gave the order for the Zorathian fleet to regroup. And, in one swift motion, they broke through the enemy lines, striking them where they least expected it. For a moment, it seemed like everything would fall apart. But then, the tide began to turn. The Zorathian ships, fueled by Lyra's leadership and Kale's guidance, fought back with a ferocity that the enemy hadn't anticipated. One by one, the enemy ships were taken down, their forces crumbling before the might of Zorath. The battle raged on for what felt like hours, but in the end, Zorath emerged victorious. The enemy was defeated, their fleet retreating into the darkness of space. Lyra stood at the helm, her hands shaking but her heart filled with pride. They had won. Zorath was safe. Kyle stood beside her, his expression unreadable. "You did it, Lyra." Lyra nodded, her voice steady. "We did it." For the first time, she felt like the leader she was always meant to be. And as the dust settled and the silence of victory settled over the battlefield, Lyra knew that the real fight was just beginning. But with Kale by her side, she felt ready to face whatever came next. The days on Zorath grew more tense as the threat to their planet became clearer. The Zorathians had always relied on their advanced technology to maintain peace and stability, but now that peace was slipping through their fingers, warships from a neighboring planet had been spotted near their borders, and whispers of an uprising within the kingdom had spread. The Zorathians, once proud and secure in their way of life, now found themselves on the edge of conflict, unsure of how to defend themselves. Kale, however, was calm. He had seen wars before, fought in battles where the stakes were higher than life itself. He had fought to protect his people, and now he was fighting for the Zorathians, even if they didn't fully trust him yet. But with each passing day, Kale became more and more certain that he was their best hope. His experience in combat, his ability to adapt, and his fierce loyalty were qualities that no one on Zorath could ignore. Lyra, despite her lingering fear of him, found herself watching Kale more and more. She had started to notice the little things, the way he spoke to her people with respect, the way he trained with the warriors, always pushing them to be better. He wasn't just a fighter, he was a teacher, a leader in his own right. And although she didn't want to admit it, she was starting to see him in a new light. One evening, as the stars began to twinkle in the sky, Lyra stood on the balcony of the palace watching the horizon. The warships were getting closer, and she could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on her. Her father had been trying to rally support from other planets, but the response had been slow. The Zorathians were alone in this fight, and she wasn't sure if they were ready. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Kale's voice interrupted her thoughts. She turned to find him standing just behind her, his presence familiar yet still unsettling. He was dressed in his worn armor, a stark contrast to the elegance of the palace. But there was something about him, something about the way he held himself, that made him fit in this world, even if he didn't belong here. "It is," Lyra replied, her voice quieter than usual. "But it's also the calm before the storm." "I can feel it. We're running out of time." Kale nodded. "I've seen it before. The calm always comes before the chaos. But when that chaos hits, you need to be ready. You need to have a plan, and you need to know who you can trust." Lyra sighed, her mind heavy with the weight of her father's expectations. "I don't know if we're ready. The people are scared, and the warriors aren't prepared for what's coming. My father is trying to hold everything together, but it feels like it's all falling apart." "You're stronger than you think," Kale said, stepping closer. "I've seen it in you. You're not like them, Lyra. You don't just sit back and let things happen. You take charge." Lyra glanced at him, feeling a flicker of warmth in her chest. She didn't know what it was, but there was something in Kale's words that made her feel like she could stand taller. She had always been expected to be the calm, composed princess, the one who could keep everything in line. But deep down, she wasn't sure if she could live up to those expectations. "What if I fail?" she whispered, her voice breaking the silence. "What if everything falls apart because I'm not strong enough?" Kale looked at her with a mixture of empathy and determination. "Failure isn't the end. It's just part of the process. You learn from it, and you keep moving forward. You've got everything you need inside of you, Lyra. You just have to believe it." Lyra met his gaze, her heart pounding in her chest. She had heard those words before from others, but when Kale said them, they felt different. There was a strength in his voice, a conviction that she couldn't ignore. She had never thought of herself as a warrior. She had always been the one who stood behind the scenes, the one who made the decisions from a safe distance. But now, with everything on the line, she realized that maybe it was time to step forward and take control of her own destiny. "You're right," she said, her voice stronger than before. "I can't let fear control me anymore. I have to fight for this planet, for my people. I have to do what's right, no matter the cost." Kyle smiled, a small but genuine smile. "That's the spirit. You're not alone in this, Lyra. I'm here. And together, we'll fight." The next morning, the Zorathian Council gathered in the war room to discuss their strategy. The threat of the enemy fleet loomed larger with each passing hour, and the pressure on Lyra and her father to come up with a plan was unbearable. Kyle stood in the corner, listening intently, his arms crossed over his chest. He had spent hours studying the battle plans, offering suggestions where he could. The Zorathians were brilliant strategists, but Kyle had the advantage of experience. Lyra sat at the table, her hands folded in front of her. She looked around the room at the faces of her people, her warriors, and her father. They were all looking to her for guidance, and for the first time, she felt the weight of the responsibility settle on her shoulders. "We need to act quickly," Lyra said, her voice firm. "The enemy won't wait for us to prepare. We must use our resources wisely and strike when the time is right." Kale nodded from the corner of the room. "You've got a plan, Princess. Now all you need to do is make sure your people are ready to fight with everything they've got. Lyra looked around the room, meeting the eyes of the commanders and the soldiers. They were all waiting for her to lead them, and for the first time, she wasn't afraid. She knew that she could. Do this! She had to. We're going to win, she said, her voice strong and unwavering. We have to. For Zorath. And in that moment, Lyra realized something important. She wasn't just the princess anymore. She was a leader, and she would fight for her people with everything she had. Kael had proven himself, but Lyra still couldn't shake the unease that had settled deep within her. Every time she saw him fight, she felt a strange mix of admiration and fear. The way he moved, so fluid and precise, reminded her of a predator on the hunt. There was a strength in him that couldn't be ignored, something beyond mere physical power. She had seen many warriors in her life, but none of them had this level of raw determination. As the days passed, Lyra found herself avoiding Kael as much as possible. She watched from a distance as he continued to train and assist her father with the ongoing conflicts threatening Zorath. His reputation among the Zorathians grew with each passing day. The soldiers spoke of him with respect, even awe. Kael had become more than just a guest on their world. He had become a symbol of something Zorath had forgotten, a reminder of what it meant to fight for survival. But despite his growing influence, Lyra kept her distance. She had her duties as a princess, and her father had made it clear that she needed to focus on her responsibilities. Her fear of Kael lingered, and she couldn't bring herself to confront it. She had always been in control of everything around her, but with him, she felt powerless. His presence unsettled her in a way she couldn't explain. One evening, after another long day of training, Lyra found herself walking alone through the palace gardens. The night air was cool, and the soft glow of the moon reflected off the shimmering flowers that lined the path. She had always found peace in these gardens, a place where she could clear her mind. But tonight, her thoughts were clouded by the human warrior. As she walked, she heard footsteps behind her. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. She could feel his presence, the way he moved with purpose and certainty. Kael was never far from her thoughts, and she hated how much his existence seemed to consume her. I didn't expect to find you here. Kael's voice broke the silence, calm and steady. Lyra stopped and turned to face him. Her heart raced in her chest. She hadn't meant for him to find her, but now that he had, she couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. I needed some time to think, Lyra replied, her voice quieter than she intended. It's been a difficult few days. Kael nodded, stepping closer. I can imagine, but sometimes we need to confront the things that scare us in order to move forward. Lyra frowned, her gaze dropping to the ground. I don't know what you mean. You're afraid of me, Kael said bluntly, and that's okay. But running from it won't make it go away. Lyra looked up at him, her expression hardening. I'm not afraid of you. You don't have to lie to me, Kael replied, his voice still calm. I can see it in your eyes. Every time we're in the same room, I can feel the tension between us. You're scared of what I represent. Lyra felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong, but deep down she knew he was right. It wasn't just fear of Kael himself, it was fear of what he represented. The unpredictability of humanity, the chaos that followed them wherever they went. I don't know why I'm scared, she said softly, more to herself than to him. I've faced danger before. I've seen wars and destruction, but there's something about you. Something I can't understand. Kael took a step closer, his eyes never leaving hers. You're afraid because I'm different, because I'm not like the Zorathians. You've never met someone like me before, and that's what scares you. Lyra swallowed hard, her breath catching in her throat. You're right. I don't know what to think about you. You're unlike anyone I've ever known. Kyle's expression softened, and for a moment, there was a flicker of something else in his eyes. Understanding. I'm not here to hurt you, Lyra. I'm just trying to survive just like you. I may be human, but I'm not your enemy. Lyra looked away, trying to process his words. She had always believed that the humans were nothing more than chaotic, destructive beings. But Kale was different. He didn't seem to care about power or control. He didn't want to conquer or destroy. He just wanted to survive. But that was what unsettled her the most. His survival instinct. It was a force that had carried him through countless battles, through the darkest corners of the universe. He was a warrior, but he was also a reminder of how fragile peace could be. I don't know what to do with you, Lyra said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. You don't have to do anything, Kyle replied. You don't have to like me or trust me, but I'm here. And I'm willing to fight for you and your people. That's all I can offer. Lyra looked at him, really looked at him for the first time. His words were simple, but there was a sincerity in them that she couldn't ignore. She still didn't understand him, but there was something about him, something that made her wonder if he might be the key to saving Zorath. I don't know what's coming, Lyra said, her voice filled with uncertainty. But I think you're right. We need to face what scares us. Kale gave her a small nod. And sometimes, the things we fear the most turn out to be the ones we need the most. Lyra stood there, silent for a long moment, her heart still racing but no longer with fear. For the first time, she felt a sense of resolve. Whatever the future held, she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't going to run anymore. The next day, Kale was taken to the Zorathian training grounds, a place where warriors practiced their combat skills. The air was thick with tension as the sounds of weapons clashing echoed around the vast arena. Kale had been told that he would undergo a series of tests to prove his worth. It wasn't enough for the Zorathians to trust him based on his words alone. They needed to see him fight, to witness his strength firsthand. Lyra stood at the edge of the training ground, her eyes following Kale as he prepared for the trial ahead. She had seen warriors train before, but none of them had the same presence as Kyle. His calm demeanor, the way he held himself, it was different. She had watched him speak with her father, and despite her fear, there was something about him that demanded attention. Kyle wasn't like the Zorathian warriors. They were taller, stronger, their bodies enhanced by technology and genetic modifications. But Kale was human, and his strength came from something deeper, his will to survive. He had fought countless battles in his life, but this was different. The stakes were higher. He wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting for a planet that had welcomed him with suspicion. The first test was simple enough. Kale was matched against two Zorathian soldiers in a sparring match. The soldiers were fast, their movements sharp and precise. Kale knew they were used to working together, but he didn't let that faze him. He had fought against odds much worse than this. He moved with grace, his every step calculated, his every punch deliberate. He didn't rely on strength alone. He relied on his instincts, his ability to read his opponents and adapt. The two soldiers came at him from both sides, their weapons aimed for his chest. But Kale was quicker. He sidestepped, grabbing one of their wrists and twisting it with a swift motion, disarming him. The other soldier tried to strike, but Kale ducked under the blow and delivered a quick punch to his opponent's stomach. The soldiers staggered back, gasping for air. Kale didn't give them a chance to recover. He kicked the first soldier to the ground, his knee landing hard on the warrior's chest, and then turned to face the second. Lyra's breath caught in her throat. She had never seen anything like it. The human warrior moved with such speed and precision, like a predator hunting its prey. There was no hesitation in his movements, no fear. It was as if he had been born to fight. The Zorathian soldiers, though, skilled, were no match for Kale's experience and raw determination. The match ended quickly, with Kale standing victorious. The soldiers were both on the ground, panting and struggling to catch their breath. The onlookers were silent, their eyes wide in disbelief. Kyle had won, and he had done so effortlessly. King Zorak, who had been watching from the sidelines, stepped forward. His expression was hard to read, but Lyra could see the respect in his eyes. "Impressive," he said. "You've proven yourself capable, Kyle. But there is more to the Zorathian way of combat than strength alone. We value strategy, unity, and the ability to think ahead. Can you do that?" Kale nodded, his eyes never leaving the king. "I can. I've fought in wars where strategy was the key to survival. I know how to think beyond the battlefield." The king studied him for a moment before turning to one of the Zorathian commanders. "Prepare the next test," he ordered. Lyra felt a knot tighten in her stomach as the next test was set up. This time, Kale was going to face a more challenging opponent, one of the Zorathian commanders, a woman named Isha. Isha was known for her intellect and battle strategy, as well as her unmatched combat skills. Lyra had watched her fight before, and she knew that Isha was one of the best. If Kale could defeat her, it would prove that he was more than just a warrior. He would be a force to be reckoned with. The arena was quiet as Kale and Isha faced each other. The air was thick with tension, and Lyra's heart pounded in her chest. She had never seen Kale fight against someone as skilled as Isha. She didn't know if he could win this time. Isha was fast, calculating, and she could read her opponents better than anyone. The fight began with a flurry of movements. Isha was quick, darting in and out of Kale's reach. She struck with precision, aiming for weak points in his defense. Kale blocked each blow with ease, his body moving fluidly as he countered her attacks. He wasn't as fast as Isha, but he had something she didn't: experience. He knew when to move, when to strike, and when to wait. Isha's attacks became more aggressive as she realized Kale wasn't going down easily. She tried to use her agility to overwhelm him, but Kale remained calm. With a sudden move, he grabbed her arm mid-swing, twisting it behind her back. Isha gritted her teeth, trying to break free, but Kale's grip was unyielding. In one swift motion, he disarmed her, sending her weapon flying across the arena. The crowd was silent. Lyra couldn't believe her eyes. Kale had defeated Isha. He had beaten one of the most skilled fighters in Zorath, and he had done it without hesitation. The victory was his, but Lyra's fear remained. She had seen Kale's strength, but it wasn't just his power that unsettled her. It was his ability to take control, to dominate the fight in a way that no Zorathian had ever done before. Kale stood tall, his chest rising and falling with each breath. He had won again. But for Lyra, the battle had only just begun. The royal court of Zorath was unlike any Kale had ever seen. The palace was vast and magnificent, its walls adorned with glowing symbols and intricate designs that told stories of the Zorathians' proud history. Everywhere he looked, he saw evidence of their advanced civilization, technology beyond anything humans had achieved. But despite their brilliance, there was something missing. The Zorathians had peace, prosperity, and knowledge. But Kale felt that they had grown comfortable in their safety. They had forgotten the value of survival. As Kale entered the grand hall, he couldn't help but notice the way the Zorathians watched him. Their eyes were filled with curiosity, but there was also something else, something darker. They didn't trust him. He could feel it in the air, a sense of unease, almost as if they feared what he represented. To them, he was an outsider, a creature from a distant, savage world. But to Kyle, they seemed fragile, like people who had never faced the real horrors of the universe. King Zorak stood tall at the head of the room, his regal presence commanding respect. His eyes were calm, but Kale could sense the caution in them. The king had been around long enough to know that not all humans were as harmless as they appeared. And though Kale's appearance might have fooled others, Zorak knew that there was more to him than met the eye. "Sit, Kale," the king said, gesturing to a chair beside him. "We have much to discuss." Kale nodded and took the seat. His body ached from the crash, but he didn't show it. He had been through worse, much worse. His mind was focused on one thing, finding a way back to Earth. But as he sat there, in the presence of a ruler who could change his fate, he knew that his survival depended on how well he adapted to this strange new world. Lyra, the princess, had been standing in the corner of the room, watching the exchange between her father and Kyle. She was silent, her eyes never leaving the human warrior. Her feelings were a whirlwind of confusion. Her fear still lingered, but there was something else, too. Something that made her heart race every time their gazes met. It was an unsettling mix of curiosity and unease. Kale's voice broke the silence. "I appreciate your hospitality, King Zorak, but I must warn you, my presence here is not by choice. My ship was destroyed in an attack. I need help to repair it, or I may never leave this planet." The king's expression softened. "We understand. You've come at a time when our world is not as peaceful as it once was. There are forces beyond our control threatening Zorath. Perhaps your arrival is not as random as you think." Kale's eyes narrowed slightly. He had heard whispers about Zorath's troubles. He had seen the warships in the skies as he descended. The Zorathians were in danger, but what kind of danger? And what role could a lone human warrior play in their fate? "I don't know if I'm the right person to help," Kale admitted, his voice calm yet firm. "But I can fight. I've fought in battles you wouldn't believe. I've survived wars between entire civilizations. If there's a way to save your planet, I'll do whatever I can." Lyra's gaze shifted from Kale to her father. She didn't speak, but her mind was racing. Could they trust him? Could a human really help them? She wasn't sure what to think anymore. Her fear was fading, but in its place was something she wasn't ready to face, an unsettling admiration for the warrior in front of her. His words were simple, but there was a sincerity in them that made her question everything she had known about humans. Her father, King Zorak, nodded. "We've seen the strength of your kind before, Kyle. We will help you repair your ship, but you must also help us in return. Zorath is at a crossroads. We've faced threats from outside forces, but there are those within our own ranks who seek to destabilize us. We need warriors like you." Kale's eyes flickered with determination. "I understand, and I'll do what I can to help. But I don't fight for free. If I'm going to risk my life for you, I need something in return." The king raised an eyebrow. "What do you want?" "I want the resources to fix my ship," Kale said, his voice unwavering. "And I want the freedom to leave once it's ready. I have my own war to fight back home." King Zorak considered his words carefully. Zorath had always prided itself on being a peaceful, neutral planet. They had never been involved in wars beyond their own borders. But this human, this warrior, had proven that sometimes peace wasn't enough. Sometimes survival required more than just intelligence. It required strength. Lyra stepped forward, her voice hesitant but firm. "You speak of war, Kyle. But what if you bring war to Zorath?" Kale turned to face her, his gaze steady. "I won't bring war here. I'll fight to protect you, but I won't start it. Your people will have to decide if they want to survive, if they want to face the future with the strength they've forgotten." Lyra's heart raced as she looked at him. The fear that had once gripped her began to shift, replaced by something else, something she couldn't name. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time she wondered if Kale might be the key to saving them all. On the lush, green world of Zorath, the air was thick with anticipation. The planet had always known peace, with its advanced technology and harmonious people. The Zorathians were a proud race, always at the top of their game, efficient, intelligent, and capable. Yet today, something strange and unsettling was happening. A human had arrived. Kyle, a human warrior, had crash-landed onto the planet, a stranger in a world completely different from his own. He had survived a battle that most would have perished in, and now, here he was, standing before the king of Zorath, a man who had seen wars and peace alike. But nothing like this. The king, Zorak, was intrigued. He had seen many species, but humans were known to be fierce. He could tell that this warrior was no ordinary human. He had the look of someone who had fought countless battles and survived against impossible odds. Lyra, the princess of Zorath, stood beside her father on the balcony of the royal palace, looking down at the scene below. The human was being escorted toward the king, his footsteps slow but steady. Lyra's heart raced. She had never seen a human before, and the stories of their wild and unpredictable nature made her uneasy. "Father, not him." Lyra's voice was a mix of fear and disbelief. "That human warrior scares me." King Zorak turned his gaze toward his daughter, his face softening as he spoke. "You fear him because you don't understand him, Lyra. This human may be different from us, but he could be of great use. His strength, his resilience. It's something that we, with all our technology, have forgotten." Lyra felt her stomach twist. She didn't know why, but something about the human's presence unsettled her. He was no giant like the warriors she was used to seeing. He didn't have the elegance of the Zorathian soldiers, nor the grace of their diplomats. But his eyes were full of something she couldn't place. There was a fire in them, a dangerous intensity that made her uneasy. "He's dangerous, father," Lyra said quietly. Her eyes locked on Kyle as he approached the king. "I've heard the stories about humans. They're not like us. They are unpredictable." King Zorak placed a hand on his daughter's shoulder, his expression firm. "The unpredictable can be useful. Don't forget that. We need to understand him, not fear him. He's here for a reason." Lyra reluctantly nodded, her mind racing with questions. What kind of warrior would land on their world, uninvited? What did he want? She couldn't help but feel a sense of dread, even though she didn't understand why. The moment Kale reached the king, the air seemed to shift. The people in the square fell silent, watching as the humans stood tall before their ruler. Kale's face was grim, his eyes scanning the surroundings. There was no fear in him, no sense of awe like many of the Zorathians. He was calm, almost unnervingly so, as if he had been in situations like this before, times where survival meant staying steady no matter what came next. "My name is Kale," he said in a voice that was deep and commanding, but also weary. "I come in peace, but I seek help. My ship crashed, and I need assistance." King Zorak studied him, his eyes narrowing as he weighed the human's words. "You have come to the right place," he said, his voice strong and confident. "But you must understand, human, that we do not take kindly to outsiders. Your arrival is unexpected." "I understand," Kale replied, his voice unwavering. "But I had no choice. I need help to fix my ship and return home. My people. We are in danger. I am not here to start a war. I only wish to survive." Lyra watched the exchange from above, her heart still racing. She couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just a simple misunderstanding. There was something about Kyle's presence, something in the way he spoke, that made her feel as though they were all standing at the edge of something larger than they could imagine. As her father spoke with the human, Lyra's eyes stayed, locked on Kale. She couldn't explain it, but her body tensed as he turned to look up at her for the briefest moment. His gaze was intense, not in a threatening way, but in a way that made her feel as though he saw through her. The feeling unsettled her further, and for the first time, she wondered if her father was right to bring him here. She turned away from the balcony, stepping back into the shadows, hoping that the fear inside her would dissipate. But it didn't. In fact, the more she thought about Cale, the more she realized that her unease wasn't just fear. It was something else, something deeper, something that felt like a warning. The human warrior was here, and whatever came next, Lyra knew one thing for sure. It was going to change everything.